Welcome to TWNow, where we examine today's news in light of the Bible. I'm Scott Winnell. Have you heard of 5G yet? If not, you will. If you have, perhaps you're excited about the incredible advances it will bring. The reality is that 5G, the next generation of wireless communication technology, will change the society that we now live in. Some say it could usher in the next industrial revolution. 5G is coming to a city or a town near you, and it will impact your life in the next few years. Are you ready? What do you need to be ready for? And what do Christians need to know regarding 5G? Today's returning guests will provide you with some insights, answers, and even questions to ponder regarding this truly awesome cutting-edge technology. I'd like to welcome back Mr. Wyatt Ciesielka. Mr. Ciesielka is a minister, a field pastor. He worked in the field of internet technology for over 25 years and is well versed in the upcoming technology. He's also a Tomorrow's World writer who has written related articles that include Internet Works of the Flesh and Flash Mobs in Bible Prophecy. He's joining us via Skype from his home near Raleigh, North Carolina. Welcome, Mr. Ciesielka.
Hello.
Mr. John Meekin is a minister and a journalist and a Tomorrow's World writer as well. He loves to follow a story and has been following the 5G story for quite some time now. He's joining us via Skype from his home in England. Welcome, Mr. Meekin. Actually, this is not his home. He's on assignment somewhere else at this point. If you have questions for our audience during our discussion and questions related to this topic, please feel free to message us and we'll do our best to get to a couple of them. Also, we encourage you to subscribe to our YouTube channel, like, and share today's program. Okay, gentlemen, let's go ahead and get started. And Mr. Meekin, I'll toss this out to you first. What is 5G for the benefit of our audience? What is 5G and why should our audience even care?
Well, hello to everybody, and thank you for the opportunity to share in this program. I think it's an absolutely fascinating subject, and it's also very timely. It's on the front pages of our magazines. We have an article on it in our own magazine, and as Mr. Winnell has mentioned, that 5G stands for fifth generation. Now that presumes that there have been 4 previous ones, and it works out something about every 10 years. It all started round about 1980. That was first generation. Second generation about 10 years later, then 3G, then 4G, then 5G. And with each advancement, there are advancements in what you can do with it. So to begin with, that was just speech on a telephone, and then it was text on a telephone, and then in the early 80s, it became a cellular phone, so we were utilizing cells, and then video was added, audio was added, and we're familiar with all this on our smartphones today, but it can be a bit patchy. So the movement to 5G is a colossal jump in the capacity, the numbers of computers, the speeds involved, and it has such enormous potential that it can literally transform the world. People are talking about it being heavily part of a potential 4th industrial revolution. So why should we be interested in it? Because it quite literally could change your life, hopefully for the better, but it could also impact your life in other ways. There are certain health issues perhaps to be concerned about, and of course how you use it is going to be a very big picture, but a very big point to go through. But it's a huge development, and it's impacting now. In this year of 2019, 50 countries have already signed up to it and are implementing it. It's racing ahead in China and the United States. Here in the UK, 24 cities in the UK have already adopted it, and they're already installing it. So it's big, very big, and we're just at the beginning of it.
Thank you. Mr. Ciesielka.
Hello, Dr. Scott and Mr. Meekin. Glad to join you both today using technology. So we are fans of the good use of technology. Just to add a little bit to what Mr. Meekin mentioned, what is 5G all about? 5G is fast. 5G is about speed. The old standards, 2G, 3G, used high frequency radio waves that reverberated between about 1 and 5 gigahertz frequency. 5G radio frequencies are 24, 50, up to 90 gigahertz frequency. And so we'll talk more about that in the program, I'm sure. But what this lets 5G networks do is push data incredibly fast. There are some 5G bands or frequencies that they're testing that are up to 120 gigahertz. So what that means is you could download an entire movie, for example, in 10, 15, 20 seconds over a 5G network, an entire high-def, 4K movie in just 10 or 20 seconds. There's a lot of practical applications for moving data at such a fast speed. Before, and I won't elaborate on that right now, but I will make one more comment. Radio frequency radiation, it sort of obeys this thing that they call an inverse square law, where basically, in simple layman's terms, what this means is that the higher the frequency, the more powerful, like 5G networks, they need the distance that they can move the radio waves and the data is smaller, is shorter. And so something we'll probably talk about later in the program today, but when we're introducing what is 5G, super fast, but the distances that the radio waves can travel is shorter than 4G, which means they need more towers, more antenna.
Okay. Mr. Meakin, when you mentioned that 5G is a colossal step forward over previous generations of this wireless technology. What does our audience need to know in terms of how this technology can impact them? If I'm sitting at home and I have my wireless device or devices, what does it really matter to me? I just follow technology and I buy the next thing that's out there. Why do I need to know about it?
Well, there's so many things to say. The main thing about 5G is it's going to fuel the Internet of Things. And they're going to put chips in almost everything. It's not those that really are that much of a concern for us in terms of any negative impact, because they will simply provide more information, which is the whole point about 5G. It's transforming our ability to utilize information. But when 5G comes to a smartphone, it's all in the antenna and the way the antenna for 5G works. It is a pulsed-phased array. And in 4 inches square, you can, and they have already done this, squeezed in something over 1,000 mini antennas in a 4-inch square, which they would like to put in your mobile phone. And then by manipulating these individual antennae, by activating them, turning some off, turning some on, you can actually steer it and direct it so that once it's on, it's firing off in every direction, looking for a target. And once it locks on that target, a similar phased array at the other end, then there's your connection very fast. But it's what all this radiation, which has been likened to bullets in the way it goes, it's pulsed very fast, very high frequency. And part of the concern is, what does that do when an individual is standing in the way of it? Or if you've got that mobile phone and there's a shield between you and the transmitting side, okay, you're not getting the radiation. What about the person on the other side? What about when you walk through this radiation just when you're out and about and walking down streets? So there are concerns, and they are very real concerns about what all that radiation is going to be doing. Now, if I just say this, that 4G in a mobile phone, as far as I have researched, could function at about 2 watts. But for 5G, it's allowed to function at 20 watts. And, of course, all of this is so much more powerful, so many more connections in a relatively small area. And so we should be concerned, because is it not true that you are inseparable from your your smartphone, you take it everywhere. And of course, now you have a smartphone on your wrist almost. We have computers everywhere. And so it is beginning to raise quite a few concerns about what the effect of this is because of the lack of research into the impact that this might have, not just on human life, but on animal life. Birds, insects, all are affected by it because we're fundamentally changing the electromagnetic environment as never before. And could add one more factor, don't forget that 5G will also be in space. There are plans to put up something like 20,000 new satellites up there just to handle 5G from space. Now, Elon Musk is at it, Amazon is at it, all sorts of people. And Elon Musk, I think there's been one successful launch of 60 satellites already, maybe another one, I think is in November, another one later on. And as soon as he gets to about 500 or something next year, he will go live to selected customers. So we are radically changing the electromagnetic environment. We're not saying that that's desperately bad. It's just saying, how much do we really know about it?
Mr. Selka, along these lines, think about how 5G is going to impact us individually. Sort of throw a couple of questions at you that I think all relate. One of them is, what are some of the big concerns to 5G? And we can begin to move into that area. Mr. Meekin's already broached that subject. One of the questions that we just got from the audience is, will 5G reduce inconsistencies? Which I think also relates to, and we can even address this a little bit more, is what are some of the benefits? What are some more of the benefits, potential benefits of 5G? Let me take a whack at one of those questions.
Right. So, there are a lot of benefits to 5G. One of the examples that's often cited is operating and surgeries, in the medical world, where you can have a surgeon conduct an operation with real-time help from people on the other side of the world, not just a video camera hookup, but actually having other surgeons around on the other side of the world that are actually controlling the instruments, robotic instruments, that they're actually helping the surgeon in location A from around the other side of the world, and they're actually helping control the instruments, helping do the surgery. So there's many benefits to super fast data movement. For example, in transportation and logistics, the ability for your car to not just know that Google Maps says, hey, there's an accident up ahead. And often there's latency with that information, and the accident maybe is still there, but it's being cleaned up or cleared up by the time you get there or whatever. With 5G, you can have all the cars talking to each other, the emergency services talking to each other and to your cars and so forth. And so you have the ability to improve transportation and logistics and things like that.
Let me stop you real quick. You mentioned latency. Does that mean that all these different devices are conversing with basically no lag time, sort of instantaneously?
Very minimal lag time. One of the big exciting things in the telecommunications world is that with 5G you can move a lot of the processing out to the periphery, is how they're phrasing it, which means that that devices can share information among themselves. So my car and your car and somebody's smartwatch and whatever can all be gathering information and sharing information with each other. And instead, here's one of the big differences. Instead of Apple or Google or whoever kind of consolidating that information and making decisions in a central location,
okay.
Right, your devices are making those decisions. Your devices are actually, crunching the numbers and making decisions or giving you recommendations. Okay. So there's a concern. I wasn't going to mention this quite yet, but I'll try to keep it super fast. The Mayo Clinic, this just came out recently. They're moving to a new cloud-based service, a Google service. And they're going to upload health data into this Google into the cloud, into Google's cloud. They're moving from one vendor to another. They just announced that. One of the concerns is as 5G develops, you'll have doctors and clinics and pharmacies and so forth that will be accessing potentially anonymized data, but you'll have these devices out on the periphery that doctors and pharmacists are using to make recommendations regarding surgery or whatever with that information. One of the concerns, and I'll conclude with this, is that IT loves to centrally control data. If you centrally control data, then you can protect the data. But when you have your device that is getting information about the patient, for example, and they're able to determine who that patient is based on other data, you have some security and privacy concerns. So anyways, there's a lot of concerns about security and privacy and data getting out there into all these little devices all around the world that are not centrally controlled.
So, Mr. Meekin, any comments, and/or I'd like to explore the area a little bit more about what are some more of the concerns with 5G.
Okay, could I deal with the question about inconsistency and consistency?
Sure.
I don't think I totally understand the context in which you're asking about will it even out consistency, but let me give you a few answers on that. The latest Economist magazine has an article about the Internet of Things, and it begins with this little anecdote. It says, during the recent Hurricane Dorian, which tracked towards America, what Elon Musk did, based in Palo Alto, California, was communicate with all Tesla electric cars to increase their battery time so that the cars had greater range as a putative emergency response to an emergency situation. Give them more range, that would be a good safety feature. Well, what that reveals is that the battery in the lower priced Teslas has part of its battery disabled. No doubt they make the same battery for the whole range, and they disable part of it for the lower range. And so by removing that, they had a lot more range. But all that, my point is, all that was done by a switch on a computer in Palo Alto, communicating directly with the battery that powers a Tesla car. Now, if that isn't consistency, I don't know what it is. Now, thinking about human beings observe. We have our five senses. We pull in data, and then we use that data to calculate. We process that data, and then we make decisions based on that data. Now, that by definition in human hands tends to be subjective. Do we have all the information? Do we all calculate or process things in the same way? Well, what we're seeing now is the beginnings of a revolution where it will be computers taking vast amounts of information and taking over these erstwhile human functions. Having gathered the data, they will attempt to process it, calculate with it, and then come up with the decision. And because they're having access to more information, and it's all down to how well they're programmed, that could lead, to more consistency in certain contexts. But it also could lead to additional control in certain contexts, which might be welcome, which addresses it. Dr. Scott was leading me into that area. So the matter of surveillance, for example, and spying and terrorism and e-terrorism that we're calling it, and this new internet has been actually dubbed the surveillance internet, because you're pulling information, and the owner of that information doesn't necessarily always know he's giving that information. And so there's an awful lot more can be said on that, but I think in certain contexts, yes, it can even out inconsistency.
Could I just maybe expand just for a second on the actual the dangers and the risks regarding the wavelengths and the frequencies themselves? Because I don't know if
Sure.
maybe we
You're talking
that.
about sort of health risks, I think, aren't you?
Right, health risks.
Or maybe risks on the environment around us?
Right. Well, so let's touch on both the environment and health risks. So 5G uses what's called millimeter wave frequencies, and these are very high frequency waves between about 24 and 100 gigahertz. And so it's a very short wavelength. And what short wavelength means is the distance between the peak of the wave and the bottom of the wave. It's a very short wavelength. Now, we know that there are environmental and biological concerns with very short, high-frequency waves like that. There have been studies published for years where insects, for example, are being microwaved to death, cooked and microwaved to death by wavelengths that are greater than 10 gigahertz, which is well below the high end of the 5G range. So 3G and 4G networks, 4G networks don't get above 6 gigahertz. So 4G networks supposedly are harmless to insects, but 5G networks again go up to 100, 120 gigahertz. So butterflies and bees and things like that can be cooked. Now to jump, to another extreme, there's a military system that's been tested and used. I don't know if it's been used in combat, but it's been tested in the field.
Crowd control, I think, is what it's used for a lot now.
Right, and basically, it's like putting somebody in a microwave oven. They can cook you. So it's the same. Basically, it's the same technology that the military uses for their, I think it's called active denial system, is what they call it, active denial system.
Of course, I think the military is not using it to cook people through, but just sort of burn the surface of the skin right now to sort of disperse crowds.
To disperse crowds, and look, on one hand, it's better than them shooting somebody, but just the point is, there's clearly an impact on a biological organism where it can heat up, heat up your body. Okay. Basically, your skin acts as a receptor to high frequency radio waves. And there are some studies that say 80 to 90% of the radiation is absorbed by your outer layer of your skin, because you have all these little sweat pores, and they're basically like little cups that collect the radiation.
So let's actually go a little bit further there. And Mr. Meekin, I'll come to you. We've got a question that relates directly to what we're talking about. And the question is, what are some other ways that 5G has been thought to affect the human body? Any negative side effects that research is beginning to suggest could happen?
Well, yes, I have one in front of me here, which would be difficult to just read to you. But there is a wealth of, some would call, anecdotal evidence out there on the effects of human beings, on animals, and on insects. I think insects are flying antennae, and it would be surprising if that didn't have some impact. And in terms of human beings, there's no question that, yes, there's a heating effect of radiation on the skin, but there is some research done that suggests that it can have a deeper impact at the frequencies they're using for 5G.
What kind of an impact? What are they thinking sort of the longer term health problems could be?
Well, just that the radiation, as it goes through the skin, can almost itself act as another antenna, and therefore spread the impact to a deeper level. Now, in terms of impact, people have reported headaches, not feeling very well in all sorts of different ways. And there are people who have electromagnetic sensitivity. They already have. I know several of them. They just can't be in a room with electromagnetic radiation in the room in the form of broadband. It just sends them loopy. Sometimes it's a tangible impact, like a headache, or a ringing in the ears, or just a vague feeling of unwell, which immediately stops when the broadband is turned off or when they leave the room. But what's lacking is official
research
studies into it.
Yeah. Okay.
So there have been studies and concerns that even 3G and 4G cell phones can cause brain cancer, and there's all these studies, and this is old news. I mean, this goes back to the 90s, where there were concerns about brain cancer from 2G and 3G devices. 5G, there's just not enough studies out there yet to there's just not enough studies. It's interesting though. Switzerland was at the forefront in Europe of wanting to deploy 5G networks, and just back at the beginning of 2019, they wanted to deploy retrofit old towers and build a bunch of new towers. They had a bunch of weird things happen with wildlife, and again, it's kind of anecdotal, and some people will say it's just conspiracy theories. But in Bern and in The Hague, there actually this happened in The Hague in the Netherlands as well, different country. There were birds in The Hague. There were also birds in Bern, Switzerland, that dropped dead. And it was coincidentally right around where they were putting up new 5G towers and doing 5G tests. So in July, Switzerland, I believe, had 334 5G antennas across the nation. And my understanding is that they wanted to have 90% of the population have access to 5G by the end of 2019. So they were being very aggressive. That would require, remember, as I mentioned earlier, the way 5G works is the distance of the signal is not as far, doesn't travel as far. So they have to essentially put towers, throughout the countryside. So you're going to be closer to towers. And there seems to be a big movement in Switzerland now where the population wants the government to stop that and to study it more because they're worried about human health hazards.
Let's push on a little bit. What Mr. Meekin, what should a Christian think about 5G? And I wanted to ask you both if there are any scriptural insights we can draw related to this area.
Well, I think the one general comment that the Bible makes all the way back in Genesis, when God scattered the nations at Babel, he said, now nothing will be withholden from them. And man, the scriptures tell us, is created in the image of God. That doesn't mean to say he always behaves like God, but he has the creative genius of the mind of God. And think of everything you see around you in the world today that man has created. The mind of man is genius. And everything to do with 5G is totally amazing. But the scriptures also say there is a way that seems right to a man, but the ends of it all are the ends of death. Proverbs 14:12 and 16:25. So because of the nature of human beings, we don't always put physical things and latest innovations and so on to good use. So you can bet your bottom dollar, as we say, that 5G will be put to evil purposes, nefarious purposes, criminal purposes. You just know it's going to happen because has happened with everything previously. And then I think because of its potential impact upon the environment, a lot of environmentalists are getting very upset because all sorts of events are happening. They don't know why. Tendency to blame it on climate change. You could blame it on 5G. Who knows? We just don't have enough information. And there's a scripture in Romans chapter 8, right about verse 22 and 23, where it talks about the whole creation is groaning for the manifestation of the sons of God, the fulfillment of God's plan and purpose, and the reason he's calling Christians at this time. The world is going to be put to different purposes. It's going to be a restoration of all things. And the world we see around us is groaning because it is being abused in so many different ways. And Christians' responsibility is twofold. Adam and Eve were told, here's the garden, dress it and keep it. And people say, this is our only home, we need to look after it, we need to look after it better. On the other hand, of human beings, God also says there in 1 Corinthians 6, we are to glorify God in our bodies and in our spirit, which for a Christian now belong to God. So should we look after our bodies? My wife would like to have internet right now turned off when she goes to bed at night and turn the Wi-Fi off because of the potential for that. Well, what's it going to be like when you've got 5G and it's outside, the antenna is on the utility pole outside your house, and this is where you live, and you're allergic to it, and you don't feel well around it. What do you do?
Right.
Authority is going to turn around and say, oh, well, we'll turn it off. They're not going to say that. They might say, well, move, but where do you move to if every street is all wired up in 5G?
Right.
And let me say one more thing on the other side of this, by the way. There will be no insurance carried by the mobile phone to cover illness. Therefore, you cannot sue anybody. So if your life all of a sudden falls apart because of illness and so on, and you think it could be attributed, well, there's no good, as far as I understand it, going to be no legal recourse in that eventuality.
Okay. Mr. Saselka, some other scriptural insights.
I think Mr. Meekin referenced in Genesis where it says that the Lord told Adam and Eve to tend and keep the earth. Christians should care about the environment, and it doesn't mean that we are against technology or, construction or things like that. But there's another scripture that I guess as I get older, I realize more of the wisdom of it, which is in 1 Corinthians 6. It says, where Paul says, all things are lawful, but not all things are helpful. And he's talking about religious ordinances. But, we should be, as Christians, prudent. And until we're sure that something is safe, we should be hesitant to do it. We know that 5G radio waves. Well, I shouldn't say we know, but there seems to be a lot of evidence that 5G radio waves can be harmful to biological organisms. So should we as Christians be early adopters? In the technology world, there's a term called early adopters. We probably should be hesitant to buy a bunch of 5G devices and put them all in our house, because we may wake up 2 or 3 years from now and realize, just like so many other things that we were told are, okay, that they're not, and people have, different cancers that are developing. So that's one point I'd make. Just another very quick point is, let's also bear in mind the potential prophetic implications. We're not saying 5G is a fulfillment of certain prophecies, but I believe that the world we've seen is motivated by greed and by competition, and you have nations that are competing for power and for economic growth. I don't think we're going to stop 5G just because birds are dropping dead in The Hague or dead in Bern, Switzerland, or there's examples of firefighters in Colorado that have been dealing with 5G towers, and they've reported health problems because of lots of exposure to 5G towers. Just because these things are being reported, I don't think that the world's going to not move forward with 5G, because it is going to be, as Mr. Meekin said earlier, a huge, huge game changer economically. Okay, logistics, manufacturing, healthcare, health diagnosis, banking. We're not going to even get into it today, but militarily, when you have combine 5G with artificial intelligence, and you have these swarm drones that can be sent out on missions and communicate with themselves over 5G networks without humans being involved. So we're not going to stop it, and it's not all bad. But what are some verses that we should think about? We should think about some of these prophecies where God warns at the end of the age. There's going to be knowledge going to and fro. There's going to be many that will trade with the beast power, and the beast will be this huge economic, empire. 5G is probably a small part of some of these prophecies.
Well, gentlemen, I think we're going to need to wind this down as we come to the end here. But I would like to ask you if you can leave our audience, Mr. Meekin, we'll start with you in a moment, if you can leave our audience with a take-home message for today. Imagine our people listening here and sitting there. How does this relate, and what do you want to have them walk away from the program today with, Mr. Meekin?
I think my first comment would be to just be in awe and wonder at what man is able to come up with in terms of technological advances. Is it overall a good thing? I think it certainly can be used for very good purposes in ways we've discussed. So I don't think it's something we should necessarily just dismiss as something evil inherently. anything like that. I just think there is so much concern about its environmental and its health aspects of it that a discerning person really ought to take stock and just think through, okay, I could get it. I could have this, that, the latest thing to help my way of life. But think about the potential downside, read literature, make sure you're well informed, and I mean, it's up to you when you jump in and start buying things. But I just think be cautious, frankly, with any new thing. There was a statement in the computer world that a certain computer, software manufacturer, oh yes, they get it right on version 3. So sometimes it's got to be said for waiting for version 3 to come out, whether it's a watch or a new phone or a gizmo or something, for the bugs to be ironed out and for the good to be proven, and then you're not walking into something that you might regret later.
Interesting point. It is interesting, too, to think about. It sounds like 5G is going into cities first. And they are putting towers all over the place in these cities. And whether we adopt 5G devices in our home or in our pocket or in our pocketbook may not matter a whole lot, because we're going to be surrounded by all this 5G wireless around us anyway and going through us. Thank you for those comments.
Right. Yeah, I won't add much to what Mr. Meekin said. Just don't. I would advise on 5G. Don't be an early adopter. Don't go buy every 5G device that you can buy and put it in your house. Let's let some of these studies come out. To give people an example of what I mean by that, I have a 4G hotspot in my house because I don't have great cell tower service right here. I try to keep it away from sleeping quarters. I don't plan on bringing in a 5G device if it were offered, ever. I don't plan on it. So that'd be one point. The other point, just briefly, is, again, we're not against technology, but we were. God wanted Adam and Eve to take care of the earth. And, Mr. Meekin and you, Dr. Scott, we were talking about Romans, how the creation sighs and cries over the abominations, over the harm. And, a human being is much more important than a bee or a butterfly. But God doesn't want us to harm the earth. And when the bees and butterflies and birds are dying, probably that's, a sign to us that we're doing something harmful to the earth and potentially to ourselves. And so I would just conclude by saying, number one, be careful to be a careful, slow adopter on the technology. But number two, remember what it says back in Ezekiel chapter 9, verse 4. It's talking about the people that are sighing and crying over the sins that they see around them. And those sins aren't just, the big sins that we know about, murder and all those things. But I think some of those sins are abuse of the planet, abuse of people, abuse of the downtrodden. So I'll just conclude by saying that I think as Christians we should be praying that Christ will return. We should be sighing and crying and looking for God's kingdom, which is going to be better. And we're not going to have, these environmental hazards and abuses like we have today.
I want to echo something you said in a previous comment too, just coming back to this idea of fulfilled prophecy and the idea that 5G is not the fulfillment of Bible prophecy, but as we understand more about it, we can certainly see how it could play into the fulfillment of multiple Bible prophecies. Gentlemen, thank you again for being on the program with us today. Mr. Meekin, thank you for taking time with us this evening. And Mr. Saselka, really appreciate your insights as well.
Thank you.
5G is coming, and in some places, its prototypes are already here. This amazing technology is exceptionally faster than current cellular technology and will allow major advances in nearly every aspect of society. But technological advances always come with a price. 5G could negatively impact human and animal health, and it will very likely lead to far more data breaches, at least early on. Ultimately, we need to remember that neither 5G nor any technological technologically advanced device of humanity is a savior. It certainly will not make society more moral or loving toward each other. 5G is a thing. It's technology. It's an innovation. It will further illustrate the creative capacity for mankind, as Mr. Meekin just mentioned. But for Christians, our major focus should always be on becoming more Christ-like, learning to think and act more like Him. Our future is in the plans of God and not in technology, no matter how fascinating and exciting technology might become. For more information on this subject, we really would encourage you to read our article, 5G, Revolution or Catastrophe. 5G, Revolution or Catastrophe, and you can find it here on our tomorrowsworld.org website. To learn more about today's news and issues in light of the Bible, we encourage you to tune in each week to TWNow. Next week, we plan to discuss the power of a day of rest. You won't want to miss our conversation. Please do again subscribe, like, or share today's program, and we'll look forward to seeing you again next week here on TWNow.